She drank from the forbidden spring and discovered an amazing truth. You are forever mine. Sarah stood at the edge of the woods, the air crisp around her, sinking into the haunting beauty of a place she had always loved, better than the smothering closeness of the diner where she worked double shifts. The town always felt suffocating, the weight of whispered judgments trailing her like a phantom. Here at least she could breathe, even as uncertainty clawed at her mind. The stories of the hidden spring danced around her thoughts, its rumored curse tantalizing and filling her with dread. But the promise of this sacred truth was a siren call, urging her closer into the shadows, where she could forget her roles as a single mother and underappreciated worker. The longing for a better life for her children pushed her forward. As she stepped deeper into the woods, tendrils of guilt wrapped around her, entwining her heart. How could she pursue dreams of becoming an environmental scientist when her children needed her strength every day? What kind of mother leaves home to chase fantasies? She pushed these fears aside, drawn toward the heart of the forest, her pulse echoing with every wary step. Surrounded by trees whispering secrets, she half hoped to find an answer to the conflict smoldering inside her, a way to carve out a future that felt just beyond her grasp. With each step, emotions surged and crashed within her, bubbling frustrations spilling closer to the surface. Why did she feel invisible, fighting for scraps of respect and recognition? Clenching her fists, memories of her harsh reality replayed, her boss's dismissive glances, colleagues snickering behind her back. They claimed she was always dreaming too big. A mother's devotion questioned. Before she could quiet the anxiety, she stumbled upon the spring, its waters sparkling in the dappled light. Heart racing, she took a hesitant sip, letting the coolness wash over her tongue. Visions exploded behind her closed eyes, swirling like autumn leaves caught in a tempest. A legacy born from struggle unfolded before her, tied to an ancestor who fought tirelessly for the environment, whose name still held weight among the ashes of forgotten histories. She gasped as clarity ignited. This moment reshaped everything she ever thought she could be. The mantra echoed, "You are forever mine." But that truth carried a weight heavier than the disenchantment she felt. Would this newfound ambition fracture her already precarious existence? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Returning to the diner, lifted by the combined weight of truth and trepidation, Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Her heart pounded against the cage of doubt, and the question of whether she should voice her dreams burned like fire in her throat. Would they laugh at her again? The shadows of the past loomed, full of societal prejudices that clung to her like a second skin, and the invisible walls around her crumbled, revealing her fierce determination. Every ounce of courage coalesced as she steeled herself, heart racing with impending confrontation. Standing at the ledge of transformation, she could almost hear the ancestral call echo through her marrow. Would she scuttle back to the safety of silence, or forge ahead into a world rife with scrutiny, fighting for recognition, dignity, and her children's future? A storm brewed within her, and Sarah knew the greatest battle was just beginning. The world ahead shimmered with potential, while shadows whispered doubts. Each uncertain moment thrummed with an urgency that would not be easily silenced. She stood at the precipice, unyielding, yet terrified of the shadows looming behind her. The clang of the diner's bell sounded like a toll of destiny as Sarah stepped inside, her heart still thrumming with the echoes of the spring's revelations. The familiar hum of the place enveloped her, yet it felt different. Gone was the anonymity. She now carried the weight of history and potential like a mantle over her shoulders. The server's apron still hung loose on her, an emblem of the mundane life she was itching to outgrow. "Hey, Sarah!" Betsy called from behind the counter, a cheerful facade masking the skepticism in her eyes when she learned of Sarah's aspirations. "You look like you've seen a ghost!" There was laughter in Betsy's words, but it pricked at Sarah's resolve. "Just exploring new ideas," she managed, forcing a smile as she took her usual place behind the coffee machine. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled her with an invigorating energy, and she drew on that as she poured. But the warmth faded quickly, drained away by the familiar twinge of inadequacy. How could she expect them to take her seriously when all they saw was a waitress? Each cup she filled was a reminder of the dreams that felt constantly brushed aside. She could hear the whispers curling around her ambitions. "You'll never be more than this," they said, wrapping around her like the vines encaged in her thoughts at the spring. But the truth set before her was alive, pulsating with possibility. She was more than their narrow perceptions. With every clink of plates and chatter of regulars, Sarah's mind raced through strategies. She envisioned herself leading community initiatives, pushing for awareness about environmental issues. "You're forever mine," she repeated internally, grounding herself in that newfound truth. She closed her eyes for a fleeting moment, envisioning standing before a board, sharing her vision. But immediately the laughter returned, naysayers ready to snuff out her light before it could even flicker into existence. "You sure you want to take on so much?" her boss quipped during a lull, catching the glint of her fervor. "You know it's a tough world out there." "Maybe it was meant to be tough for a reason," she countered, before realizing the thought had escaped her lips unfiltered. The piercing surprise in his eyes startled her. The room swelled with a newfound tension as patrons leaned in, intrigued. She felt the pulse of something electric in that moment. Suddenly, speaking up didn't feel like an impulsive mistake, but a bold declaration of her ambition. Suddenly, her dreams weren't fractured pieces hiding timidly in her chest. They were emerging into the light, desperate for acknowledgement. Stepping back from the counter, Sarah's heart raced as she eyed Betsy, whose eyebrows shot up in curiosity. The gaze she received wasn't mocking but intrigued. There was power in vulnerability, and as she shifted between the familiar and the unknown, doubts retreated. Maybe she could change her life, or at least spark interest in her story. The day dragged on, each hour transforming into opportunities filled with precarious uncertainties. She opened the door to newer versions of herself, rehearsing pivotal conversations in her mind, what she would say to the town council, how she could inspire others. Igniting fears of ridicule only fired her courage more, feeding the belief that she was born from legacies of resistance and strength. Yet beneath the fierce determination lay an undercurrent of anxiety. With progress came the inevitable disapproval and doubts, and she felt the delicate balance of her dual existence, mother and visionary. What would she sacrifice to pursue this path? With every clattering dish and cautious smile exchanged, the tension rose within Sarah as she pondered her future. "Maybe tomorrow I should start," she thought, but self-doubt flickered in the back of her mind. The notion that tomorrow might never come hung heavily, punctuating her realization. It was now or never. "How will I even begin?" she whispered to herself. The question opened a door she wasn't fully ready to step through, but she was willing to try, for herself and the children she cherished dearly. As she organized the tables after the lunch rush, her resolve solidified. Tonight would be different. She would sit down with her notes, her heart racing against the inertia of fear. She would draft a proposal, using her knowledge and the unbroken spirit of her lineage to fuel her ambition. But as she turned from the last table, a figure loomed in the doorway, a familiar face juxtaposed against her dreams. The town's leading environmental critic, someone who represented everything she feared. The moment of reckoning crystallized. Would her fire be extinguished by this confrontation, or fueled into a raging blaze? The tension in the air became palpable, and Sarah stood at the threshold of her transformation, ready to face whatever came next. The bell's chime faded, leaving Sarah in a bubble of silence fraught with tension. The entrance's looming presence seemed to draw the world's weight directly onto her shoulders. A chill danced through her spine as she regarded Thomas Hall, the very critic whose laughter haunted her aspirations. He hovered between leisure and challenge, his arms folded, an expression inscrutable, like a statue that had seen centuries of conflict. "Sarah," he greeted, his voice steady but cool, "I didn't expect to see you here." The words carried a mixture of feigned surprise and genuine caution, as if he were preparing for a battle in which he had the edge. In that moment, her resolve nearly crumbled. The thoughts cascaded. What if he laughed? What if he dismantled her dreams with just a few words? Yet beneath the fear lay fury. Here was the embodiment of the very barriers she sought to dismantle. Steeling herself, she remembered that this was the confrontation she had envisioned, albeit not with him specifically. It dawned on her that every piece of courage she had unearthed during moments of clarity would now serve her. "What brings you to my neck of the woods?" she asked, feigning nonchalance while her pulse quickened. "I'm here for the coffee, of course," he replied, leaning against the doorframe casually. The taunt hung in the air, weighted and condescending. "But I also wonder if you're serious about this environmental crusade you've suddenly adopted. It's quite ambitious for someone in your position." His barb sliced through her calm. Each syllable dripped with skepticism, and yet something ignited. The room shrank away. It was just the two of them. The familiar diner transformed into an arena. "I believe it's essential for our community," she countered, her own voice gaining traction. "People like you have too often dictated the narrative. Maybe it's time for a change?" His brow furrowed, momentarily surprised at her unexpected defiance. But then that challenging glint reappeared. "You know, your ideas are dreamlike. They'll require more than just ambition to be taken seriously. Have you really thought this through?" Each word was like a gauntlet thrown. He was calling her bluff. It jolted her clarity into harsh focus. Ambition. It was indeed more than just a word. It needed a plan. "Yes, I have," she asserted, feeling the strength of her own conviction, marshalling her thoughts as if they were troops ready for deployment. "You think my aspirations come lightly, but I've been studying, planning. A proposal. It starts with small steps, but I need backers. I can explain that." "You assume that someone like me would help you?" "We have a long way to go before any of your ideas get traction," he challenged, leaning forward as if to hammer his point home. She refused to back down, replying with a steely calm, "You'd be surprised what can happen when people believe in something and act on it. Perhaps you're frightened of change." For a heartbeat, the world around them buzzed into silence, punctuated by the clatter of the kitchen behind her, making her feel even more alone. Yet, it was a loneliness pregnant with possibility. If he could see her as more than a mere waitress, then maybe others would too. But doubt gnawed at the corners of her mind. Could she truly convince someone like Thomas Hall? This tension now had two faces, the critic and the champion. Could the confrontation spur her courage or unravel her budding resolve? "You're grasping at straws," he offered, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a hesitant intrigue. "You may yet become a force. Just keep in mind, the fight isn't easy." "Neither is being underestimated," she shot back, emboldened by an inner voice that urged her on. She felt the possibility of a new path opening, razor-edged yet defined. As he turned to leave, there came a final challenge, the question that would linger in the air. "Do you really think you can change their minds, Sarah? You're just a waitress." That statement rang loud in her ears, dragging her back to the ground, yet sparking with defiance. The essence of his skepticism ignited the core of her ambition, reminding her that change begins with one voice, battling the noise of the multitudes. Sarah stood taller, a fire igniting within, a realization that she was already more than a waitress. She needed to harness that restless energy, to translate it into action. She clasped the edges of her apron, grounding herself as she stepped back from the threshold of vulnerability. She had a proposal to draft, not just to inform but to inspire. But the clock was ticking on her decision. The urgency wrapped around her like a thick fog. If she didn't take action soon, the moment could slip away like a shadow in fading light. What would be her next step in this unfolding struggle? The thought began to take root as Sarah stared at the diner's door, the bell echoing one last time like a siren call for all she might become. How far was she willing to go to prove herself? The fire of commitment flickered like a candle in the wind, and the next confrontation, with its stakes laid bare, was waiting just beyond her reach. Would she embrace the challenge regardless of the potential for failure, or would fear smother the flame before it had a chance to blaze? Against the backdrop of brewed coffee and clattering dishes, Sarah stood on the precipice of transformation, ready to test her limits once and for all. Her moment was at hand. She had only to seize it. The evening shifted into a quiet hum, the colors around Sarah blurring into soft grays as the diner emptied, leaving only scattered patrons nursing their final cups of coffee. She felt inexplicably heavier, the weight of possibility pushing against her chest. Thomas Hall's words echoed repeatedly in her mind, a relentless mantra that dared her to rise above the mundane confines of her life. As her shift ended, Sarah wiped down the counter with barely any thought, her hands moving on autopilot while her mind raced. Each swipe of the rag was a calculated swipe against self-doubt, repelling the notion that being a waitress defined her. She was more than just her title. She was an idea in the making. Biting her lip, she considered the proposal she had hinted at to Thomas. The faintest outline sketched in her mind needed honing into something tangible. It demanded focus and clarity. Her heart thumped rhythmically, stirring a sense of urgency. If there was any match for the flame inside her, it was the drive to prove herself to Thomas and, more importantly, to herself. That night, against the backdrop of her small apartment, the walls seemed to draw closer around her as she pulled out a laptop. The hum of its wake-up sound felt both alien and invigorating. Apprehensively, she opened a blank document. This was it. The moment to pour her spiraling thoughts into a cohesive strategy. She began outlining her environmental campaign. Ideas flowed like a river, each word becoming the stones that would bridge her dreams to the reality she desperately needed. She broke down her vision: local engagement, habitat restoration, educational workshops on sustainability, all the while questioning how she could rally the community around her. But as her fingers danced over the keys, the swell of enthusiasm was pierced by piercing doubts. Could she truly mobilize others? The nagging thought chimed in: who would listen to a waitress? Oh, but that wasn't the point. Her worth wasn't tied to her job title, and it certainly wasn't defined by the skepticism lurking in the shadows of Thomas's disapproval. Drawing in a deep breath, Sarah deliberated on her step forward. The other voices that clustered in her mind were irrelevant. She must validate her ideas against her own convictions, not others' expectations. Focusing sharply on what she could control, she began to flesh out her proposal with numbers. Facts about the ecological degradation in her community, statistics on climate impact, and potential benefits of her initiative. She was not just navigating an ocean of ideas, she was charting a course. Hours melted away as her laptop screen filled with vibrant dreams formatted into actionable plans. She realized that her anger at Thomas's condescension was not merely a response to his disrespect. It was a catalyst nudging her to push through the walls that enclosed her potential. Suddenly, an unfamiliar sense of confidence surged through her veins. It felt as though she had jumped out of her own skin. Sarah as the waitress felt small, but who was Sarah as a visionary? A shiver of exhilaration pulsated within her. Her voice would no longer be the whisper of the underestimated. With her fingers poised to save, she hesitated. The moment felt pivotal. She understood now that the risk she would take in sharing her proposal wasn't just for validation. This was a personal revolution. She was stepping from the sidelines to claim her voice. And in that realization, a flood of freedom washed over her. There would always be doubters, but the weight of their disbelief paled in comparison to the light of her resolve. Shutting her laptop while the dawnlight trickled through the blinds, Sarah felt a flicker of panic intermingled with excitement. Had she truly prepared enough to face the scrutiny ahead? Her proposal was now more than just a paper. It was a commitment to herself. The fear lingered, a shadow whispering caution in her ear, yet it was entwined now with determination. As she prepared to approach Thomas for their next meeting, the looming specter of failure no longer felt paralyzing. It was a necessary risk, one she needed to embrace. The bell of the diner rang as if marking the start of a new chapter. Sarah stood at the threshold of something transformative, ready to unravel how conviction could reshape her identity. Would she be met with derision again? Or would she find allies where she least expected them? Only by stepping into that next challenge could she uncover the truth behind her ambitions. The battle was just beginning, and she was ready to fight. The sun rose with a determined vigor, illuminating Sarah's resolve. She stood before the diner's entrance, her breath steadying as she felt the cool morning air invigorate her spirit. Adjusting her grip on the leather folder cradled in her arms, she reminded herself of the countless hours spent honing her proposal. This was her moment. Beneath the familiar flicker of the diner's neon sign, she rehearsed her presentation silently, each repetition sharpening her confidence. The sound of a bell chimed as the door swung open. Thomas entered, a disheveled front against the dawn. There was a slight edge in his eyes that spoke of judgment, but also perhaps curiosity. "Morning, Sarah." His tone carried the weight of authority, prompting her heartbeat to quicken. "Morning, Thomas. I have something I'd like to discuss." The steadiness of her voice surprised even her. "Let's hear it." He gestured to a booth, settling in opposite her with his habitual air of impatience. Sarah took a breath, unfolding her proposal much like a blossoming flower. It spelled out her vision in stark simplicity, an initiative that boldly challenged the status quo he personified. The tentative words on the pages transformed into her purpose as they left her lips, each sentence needled with pain and hope. She intricately wove in facts, strategies, and her raw passion, squaring off her vulnerabilities with facts. However, as she presented, she felt a growing tension shift in the air. Thomas's expression oscillated. Amusement flickered behind those scrutinizing eyes. It pinched her enthusiasm. Doubt crept back in, tugging at the seams of her renewed confidence. What if she could not convince him? What if her efforts languished like a lingering aftertaste of an unsavory meal? His interjection cut through the swirl of her thoughts. "Sarah, while your enthusiasm is commendable, you're expecting a lot from a community that isn't ready for this kind of change. Reality doesn't bend for passion." The words felt like ice on her skin. They were a stark reminder of the uphill battle she faced. Yet, as if summoned by a hidden resolve, she leaned in, refusing to let his dismissiveness anchor her. "Reality can only change if someone has the courage to challenge it," she countered, her tone gaining strength. "You may see this as futile, but what if I said I am willing to invest my time and energy into this because I believe it's possible?" For a moment, silence stretched between them like a taut wire. It was a game of wills, and Sarah could feel her heart thumping against her ribs, pushing her to press forward. A challenge surged within. She no longer sought mere approval, but rather an alliance. "Of course, passion is important, but you need a plan, resources, a budget, a contingency for failure," Thomas replied, his voice calculated. "I've thought of those," she insisted, producing an additional sheet with a rough outline of potential funding sources and community partnerships. "No one talks about how just starting with a conversation can ignite others. I want to be that spark." His gaze flickered, weighing her words against the backdrop of his skepticism. The uncertainty within her rumbled with fear, but this was a moment of reckoning, and she refused to back down. "Perhaps," he remarked, leaning back with apparent disinterest, yet his fingers tapped steadily against the table, revealing something deeper, a latch of intrigue. Sarah could sense it, and it fueled her fiery determination. As the minutes wore on, an unexpected shift emerged within the discussion, revealing layers to Thomas she had not anticipated. Beneath his professional facade, she glimpsed a man grappling with the change he once thrived on, but had lost sight of amidst comfort and routine. Recognizing that this was a pivotal juncture, she pressed more, conceiving the conversation as a forging ground for truth and inspiration. What if they could influence change together, instead of the solitary endeavor she originally envisioned? "Let's pioneer a path, Thomas. You have connections I need. I believe we could resonate with others. Get the conversation started," she ventured, her heart beating madly at the radical thought of collaboration. Through every interaction, she discovered pieces of strength she hadn't known she possessed. Advocacy and resilience entwined like ivy around her intentions. The moment fluctuated, pulling her closer to astonishing realizations about their shared mission, challenging expectations and personal resolve. Thomas finally straightened, the remnants of disbelief fading as curiosity led him. "You may have something here," he conceded slowly, a hint of a challenge creeping back into his voice. "But this is just the beginning. What's your real plan?" Her pulse quickened as clarity washed over her. This wasn't merely about presenting ideas. It was about forging an unexpected partnership with someone she had viewed as an antagonist. "Let's redefine the narrative. Together." In that exchange, Sarah not only felt the winds of possibility shift, but also caught a glimpse of her own evolving identity, a conflicted tapestry of fear and ambition. As Thomas leaned in, something beautiful and terrifying appeared on the horizon of her journey. Would their tentative alliance stand against external skepticism, or would it be another moment in time fated to dissolve under pressure? A new chapter loomed ahead, and the question echoed in the spaces of her mind. Was she ready to embrace the complexities of this uncharted collaboration? The tension lingered like the last echoes of a haunting melody as Sarah scanned the diner, glancing at the familiar faces drifting in and out, absorbing the gravity of her conversation with Thomas. There was an undeniable shift in the atmosphere, a palpable energy that ignited something deep inside her. She had started as a voice struggling to be heard, but now she caught a glimpse of her potential, a possibility that extended beyond herself. "Let's talk logistics," Thomas interjected, his demeanor shifting slightly, revealing an air of reluctant engagement. "If we are to embark on this, you need to lay out your vision more clearly. I need to understand how you plan to carry it out, sustain it." That challenge ignited a fire within her. This was not merely about familiarizing Thomas with her thoughts, it was about the meticulous crafting of her map to success. She nodded, conscious of the weight of expectation resting on her shoulders. "I have a phased approach in mind," she replied, her voice steady, propelled by newfound conviction. "First, we start with community dialogues, informal gatherings to share our ideas and gather feedback. Then we can refine the proposal based on real input. Once we build trust, we transition into actionable steps like workshops and pilot programs." Thomas sat back, his eyes narrowing slightly as he absorbed her points. "And the financial aspect? I've researched potential grants, local business sponsors, and crowdfunding avenues," she said, producing more documents. "With targeted outreach, I believe we can gather enough support within 3 to 6 months." In that moment, her meticulous preparation erupted into a sense of purpose that felt almost euphoric. This wasn't an act of desperation, it was a statement of her capabilities. She spoke with authority as she outlined the broader implications of their initiative, painting a picture that shimmered with potential, like daylight filtering through the trees. As she continued, she started to perceive subtle shifts in Thomas. The crease in his forehead had softened, replaced by a spark of contemplation. What had begun as a reluctant evaluation was transforming into curiosity, a desire to engage. This was not about persuading him, it was about meeting him where he stood and guiding him along the path toward change. But as inspiration began to manifest, an unsettling thought clawed at her. Could she truly trust him? A growing suspicion wrinkled the corners of her resolve. How could someone so rooted in tradition suddenly adapt to radical change? She reminded herself that just as she was evolving, so too could Thomas. "Sarah," Thomas broke through her thoughts, "if we proceed, there's a risk involved. You need to be prepared for setbacks, people who will push back, even ridicule your vision. It's essential to have a fallback." She breathed deeply, allowing his caution to sink in. "I know I can't avoid setbacks, but if we wait for certainty, we may lose the momentum entirely. The key is not to be paralyzed by fear." A contemplative silence stretched, tethered by a fragile thread of newfound alliance. As she studied his expression, it was clear that they were both standing on the precipice of transformation. Emerging from confrontation into collaboration was a monumental shift for her, revealing the fissures in her own resilience. "Very well, let's see if we can organize that first dialogue. I'll lend my support, but you need to take the lead," Thomas conceded, his voice holding an uncommon hint of encouragement. Relief washed over her as uncertainty transformed into an exhilarating promise. Together, they could invigorate the stagnant landscape of complacency. Yet beneath the thrill lingered a deep-seated anxiety. Could her vision withstand the turbulence she anticipated? Each step forward felt like a dance on a tightrope, and she was acutely aware that her ambitions rested not solely on her shoulders, but also on the unpredictable tides of human nature. As they delved into specifics, Sarah recognized the gravitational pull of self-doubt gnawing at her confidence. She had come so far, but with partnership came the specter of vulnerability. Would she have the tenacity to uphold her vision under scrutiny? The day merged into evening, and with the backdrop of streetlights catching the dusk, Sarah left the diner, a mix of exhilaration and trepidation thrumming in her veins. The world outside buzzed with ordinary life, but she was on the brink of something extraordinary. Stepping out, she whispered a quiet affirmation to herself. This was not just a project, it was a pathway to reclaiming her voice, a chance to reshape her destiny. A pressing realization unfolded within her mind. If her idea was going to thrive, she would have to embody the change and confront any lingering shadows within, including her own fears. And as she prepared for the conversation ahead, a lingering question wrapped around her thoughts. Was she ready to reveal her true self in the pursuit of something greater? In that moment, the road ahead transformed into a winding enigma, daring her to confront not only the world, but also the unseen barriers within herself. What truths would emerge as she stepped deeper into unknown territory? Only time would unveil the answers. As the early morning light peeked through her curtains, Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the floor. The weight of the day ahead pressed down on her, blending excitement with an almost suffocating anxiety. Today wasn't just a meeting. It was a test, an opportunity to unveil her vision before a group of local stakeholders who held the power to either amplify or diminish her voice. She had drafted the outline of her presentation countless times, tweaking it under the harsh glow of her desk lamp, anticipating objections and reinforcing the bones of her argument. But no matter how meticulously she prepared, doubt gnawed at her resolve. What if they saw through her plans, exposing a patchwork of dreams sewn together without the threads of solid experience? Each element of her initiative felt like a thread, fraying ever so slightly under the weight of scrutiny. She paced back and forth in her small living room, each step echoing her internal conflicts. "Focus," she whispered to herself, pushing back against the rising tide of self-doubt. In those frantic moments, she recalled the words of Thomas from last night's meeting. You have to embody the change. She had chosen this path, an uncharted territory riddled with risks, but had she prepared herself for the scrutiny of those who would question her authority? Grabbing her notes, she familiarized herself with the key points, reminding herself that her passion was the heart of her argument. She quickly highlighted the benefits of community engagement, the data showcasing the success of similar initiatives, and the potential for revitalizing a stagnant neighborhood. With deep breaths, she reaffirmed her capabilities. She had insights, passion, and most importantly, a vision that was uniquely hers. Sophia, her closest friend, had offered to accompany her for moral support. As she arrived, the two exchanged encouraging smiles, but behind Sophia's bravado, Sarah sensed her own friend's anxiety brimming beneath the surface. They shared a bond built on candor, and Sarah appreciated the unspoken understanding that flickered between them. The venue was a quaint community room with large windows that revealed a panorama of the bustling street outside. Sarah took her place at the front, her palms slick against her notes, heart pounding loudly in her ears as the attendees trickled in. With every familiar face, Sarah fought the instinct to cower, reminding herself of the reason she was there, to ignite discussion and inspire change. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. She glanced at the assemblage, faces etched with curiosity. For a moment, the fear within her ebbed, replaced by a surge of determination. She was here, not just for herself, but for those who felt voiceless. As she dove deeper into her presentation, a fire ignited within her. She articulated her vision with fervor, her hands gesturing animatedly. Touching on her phased approach, she engaged the audience, weaving stories and statistical data with passionate rhetoric, drawing them into her perspective. But just as her words soared, questions began to rise. Skepticism punctured the air like a needle against fabric. "How do we know this will work?" one voice called out sharply. The others ratified it with murmurs, a swell of doubt threatening to drown her spirited momentum. She hesitated, gravity pulling down her confidence as the issue of trust emerged. Could she truly persuade these individuals who had spent years in the comfort of their established routines? Sarah swallowed hard, grounding herself in the truth of her vision. "I believe," she began, her voice focused and deliberate, "that we cannot reshape these streets without first engaging with the voices within them. Transformative change starts with conversation and trust." Yet she felt a flicker of defensiveness emerge. She couldn't let fear steer the ship now. No longer was she merely presenting ideas. She had to stand firmly as the voice of her vision. "What we need is collaboration. I cannot do this alone, and neither can we. Together, we can build a foundation that is accountable to our shared hopes." As her confident conviction shone through, she noticed subtle shifts in expressions, the tilt of a head, the softening of crossed arms, moments of contemplation that hinted at openness. But just as she thought she could catch her breath, another question erupted from the back of the room. "What if you fail?" The inquiry hung heavy, a stark reminder of her own trepidation. Time seemed to stretch as she grappled with the depth implicit in the question. Confronting the room, she realized this was no longer just about logistics. It was about resilience, the commitment to rise again despite obstacles. "Failure is a possibility," she replied, her voice resolute. "But I can assure you, little is gained without the courage to pursue a vision that resonates. I am prepared to learn from every misstep." With every heartbeat, she embraced the concept of failure woven into success, a revelation that flickered through her mind like electricity. As Sarah wrapped up, she felt a budding confidence swell within her, one carved from the challenges she had just faced. There was a sense that the room had shifted. She had broken down walls that at first felt insurmountable. The questions had tested her, but they had also ignited a strength within her she hadn't known existed. As the attendees engaged in discussion afterward, varying expressions morphed from skepticism to curiosity, and she could sense a crack of possibility unfolding. Yet even amidst the emerging alliances, a shadow of doubt lurked at the edges of her mind. Would she ultimately find the resilience to withstand the backlash that lay ahead? In her pursuit to fulfill her vision, there was still the lingering question of what this journey would demand of her, and whether she truly possessed the strength to face whatever awaited on the other side of triumph and adversity. What other unforeseen challenges would test her resolve and force her to confront the depths of her own assumptions? The journey had only just begun. The sun sank lower in the sky, casting a warm glow across the community room as discussions unfolded around her. Sarah noticed an exchange of ideas, voices spilling over with enthusiasm, a response she hadn't anticipated. A man she recognized as a long-standing member of the local business association approached her, his expression shifting from uncertainty to inquisitive intrigue. "I think there's potential in your plan," he said, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "But what are we going to do when the costs outweigh the benefits? That's my concern." His question stirred something within her. Instead of faltering, she embraced the moment like a gift. Every investment has risks, but with collaborative input, we can identify potential pitfalls and navigate them together. It's about sustaining an ongoing dialogue while being adaptable and prepared to pivot. She watched his brow furrow, thoughtful. This was her opportunity to further engage, to elevate the conversation from mere skepticism to critical collaboration. "Perhaps we can explore joint ventures," he suggested, his tone morphing into one of genuine interest. "Absolutely," Sarah replied, recognizing the shift toward possibility. "We should look at potential partnerships with local organizations that have already laid the groundwork. Together, we can leverage existing resources to minimize risks." Encouraged, she stepped into deeper discussions, weaving in solutions and options. She advocated for measurable outcomes to assure stakeholders their investments would be safeguarded. Each dialogue ignited her determination further, and the intertwining of voices around her transformed into a melody of shared aspiration. In that room, the vulnerability she had previously harbored began to dissolve under the warmth of support. However, even amidst this blossoming camaraderie, Sarah sensed an undercurrent of skepticism persist. Questions whispered among the attendees about her lack of experience and the uncompromising weight of expectations. She felt a flare of anxiety ignite, but she quickly extinguished it with resolve. The challenge before her was daunting but necessary. Returning home that evening, her mind buzzed with reflections. She replayed moments from her presentation, measuring the weight of each word and dissecting her responses to questions. As her thoughts entangled themselves into an endless loop, Sarah found herself standing in front of an empty canvas, her journal. What if this raw introspection could serve as a springboard for her next steps? She grabbed her pen, letting her thoughts spill like ink across the page. It became a cathartic process, where doubts transformed into articulation and confusion into clarity. "What am I afraid of?" she wrote down. "The fear that my vision doesn't align with reality? That I lack the qualifications to lead? Or perhaps the insistence on perfection?" Progress is not only about the outcome, it is about the journey. With each stroke, she unearthed hidden layers of her aspirations and hesitations, giving form to the complexities lying within. She wrestled with the various facets of leadership, the responsibility, the unpredictability, and still, the immense fulfilling potential that lay in collaboration. It dawned on her how critical it was to remain open to feedback, to learning, the very essence of growth. As she penned her concluding thoughts, a knock on the door interrupted her contemplation. Sophia stood there, eyes alight with curiosity. "So how did it go?" she asked, stepping inside. Sarah hesitated before responding. "It was enlightening, but it's clear I've barely scratched the surface." "That's a good thing, right? It means there's room to grow." Sophia smiled, her encouragement fueling Sarah even further. "Yes, but I can't shake the feeling that what lies ahead may challenge me in ways I can't yet predict." Sophia's expression shifted, seriousness creeping into her tone. "You have to prepare for the possible backlash, Sarah. Not everyone will rally behind you. Some may push back harder than you could ever imagine." It was true, and there it was. The awareness that potential resistance and doubt would linger became an urgent reality she hadn't fully grappled with yet. Her pulse quickened at the thought. "Maybe failing is not just a possibility. It could be an inevitability," Sarah muttered, experiencing a newfound gravity in her resolve. With each potential obstacle on the horizon, her mind began plotting paths to counteract the challenges. As Sophia encouraged her with practical ideas on how to measure progress and maintain enthusiasm amidst adversity, Sarah felt an emerging strength. This was more than just planning. It was absolutely a positioning of identity and intention. "Are you ready to face your naysayers?" Sophia prompted, a stern yet encouraging glint in her eyes. "Yes," Sarah breathed, feeling the pulse of determination surging within her. But as they dove deeper into preparation, a dark whisper of doubt gnawed at the edges of her consciousness. What if this journey unveiled more than just external challenges? What if it unveiled truths buried deep within her, reminding her of fears she thought long buried? Little did Sarah realize, the next morning would bring not only a reflection of her inner turmoil, but a significant encounter that could redefine everything she thought she knew about leadership and resilience. The morning light streamed through the gaps in Sarah's curtains, illuminating the cluttered desk where papers lay strewn about, evidence of her late-night reflections. Unsure how to navigate her day, she fought the urge to retreat into her thoughts. Today was not merely another Tuesday, it would be a turning point, she determined. As she made her way to the local cafe, the faint scent of roasted coffee beans invigorated her senses. Striding past familiar faces, she felt the weight of judgment lingering in the air. Each smile and nod seemed layered with unvoiced expectations. Did they view her as capable, or merely an ambitious beginner who had yet to prove herself? The thought nagged at her, like a low hum in the back of her mind. Settling into a corner table, her fingers curled around the warm ceramic mug. Sophia's words echoed, about naysayers and backlash. She envisioned herself in the community meeting tomorrow, facing questions and potentially harsh critiques. The anticipation left her both exhilarated and on edge, oscillating between deep resolve and the threat of vulnerability. Sarah's reflection was abruptly interrupted as a figure approached her table. It was Marcus, a former colleague and an outspoken skeptic of her aspirations. He drew in a breath, visibly calculating the appropriateness of his approach. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice carrying a veneer of casualness that belied the tension between them. "Sure," Sarah replied, forcing a smile, her heart pounding. Sociability had never felt so precarious. Once settled, Marcus wasted no time. "I've heard whispers about your upcoming presentation," he said, his expression a blend of curiosity and skepticism. "Do you really think you can execute all that? It seems ambitious." The challenge hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown down. Sarah took a moment, breathing deeply, drawing on the introspection from last night. "Why not?" she answered, surprising herself with her tone. "Isn't ambition necessary for progress? If I don't push the boundaries, how will I know what's possible?" Marcus's eyebrows raised slightly, piercing through her defenses. "You sound confident, but there's a fine line between confidence and recklessness. What happens when your vision doesn't match reality?" His words felt like ice water, cutting through her bravado. "It's part of the learning process," she replied, feeling the familiar anxiety grip her. "Failure, feedback, adaptation, they're all parts of growth. I'm not afraid of encountering challenges. I'm more concerned about not taking risks," she stressed, her voice steadying. His piercing gaze seemed to evaluate her resolve. But what if you don't have the backing you expect? Opinions can be harsh. The familiar gnawing in her chest returned, a visceral reminder of her doubts. Yet instead of folding beneath his scrutiny, Sarah felt a surge of defiance. "I know I can't please everyone," she said earnestly. "But perhaps the bigger question is, what will it take for me to believe in myself?" Silence enveloped the table, giving her statement weight. She dared to lock eyes with him, reminding herself of her promise to pursue resilience, to deepen that belief, even in the shadows of uncertainty. Marcus's demeanor shifted. A flicker of respect sparkled across his features, almost imperceptible. "Maybe you'll surprise us all, yes?" His tone had lightened, a novice encouragement peeking through. "Surprise is a possibility I'll embrace," she declared. With that, the conversation shifted. They exchanged ideas rather than doubts, a tentative collaboration born out of mutual respect. As the clock ticked closer to the meeting, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that each decision she was making was leading her down an unexpected path. Preparing for the backlash no longer felt like a burden, but instead an exhilarating challenge. Yet buried beneath her burgeoning confidence remained fragments of uncertainty, a question that had begun to haunt her. What if the biggest obstacle was herself? The cafe's familiarity began to fade as she gathered her things to leave. While she understood she was stepping into the unknown, her earlier anxieties were now tinged with anticipation. She had a choice to make: cling to past fears or dare to redefine herself entirely. Outside, the air was thick with the promise of change. As she approached her car, she inhaled deeply, feeling a surge of determination course through her veins. But it wasn't until she spotted a figure in the distance, a disheveled man seemingly trapped in despair as he wandered aimlessly, that her path took another unexpected turn. Perhaps here lay an opportunity for the new leader she was striving to become. Would she dare to confront the fears both within and outside herself? The moment felt pivotal, the question lingering in the air. Would she act? Facing the figure, Sarah felt a familiar flutter of uncertainty in her stomach. He appeared lost, grappling with something invisible. It was a moment unlike any other, one that transcended her internal struggles and absorbed her attention entirely. Here stood an embodiment of the challenges she wanted to address, a real-life reminder of why she had embarked on her journey in the first place. "Hey, are you okay?" she called out, her voice trembling with unexpected concern. The man turned towards her, eyes dimmed by shadows of hardship. His disheveled hair hung low, and the lines on his face told stories of struggles that mirrored her own fears. "Just trying to find my way," he murmured, his voice low and burdened, as if lifting it took more energy than he could muster. She could sense the weight of despair that mirrored the doubt she often felt, an undeniable connection forged through shared human vulnerabilities. Indecision gripped her, but recalling her vision ignited a flicker of bravery. "I understand how that feels. I'm working on something that might brighten this community. Would you be willing to share your thoughts on what can be done to help others on that journey?" His gaze shifted, surprise evident in the flicker of interest. "Like what?" As Sarah spoke about her vision for community dialogue and cooperation, she felt a wave of clarity wash over her. Here was a genuine opportunity to show that leadership meant connecting with those whose lives were directly impacted by the very issues she was passionate about. Together, they chatted about the community's needs, genuine concerns pouring from his lips as she listened intently, absorbing each word like a life raft in an ocean of self-doubt. For the first time, she felt an undeniable transformation swell within her. She was no longer merely the waitress dreaming of bigger things, but a voice of hope and agency. By the time they parted ways, Sarah had taken what she needed, a renewed sense of purpose. The man's stories had crystallized her vision into something tangible. She would not only advocate for environmental change, but promote dialogue and healing throughout the community. It was a full-circle moment that magnified her mission, pushing boundaries she had once marked as insurmountable. As she strode toward her car, her heart raced with newfound determination. At the upcoming meeting, she would present not just her ideas, but the stories of individuals like him, voices that needed to be heard. "I will embody change," she affirmed inwardly, uniting her visions with real-world impact. When she entered the community hall later that day, the ambiance was different from her previous visit. Tension had transformed into electric anticipation. Stakeholders gathered, discussing how her proposal could lead to fruitful partnerships. This was the moment she had been preparing for, showcasing that the depths of human experiences could drive an initiative that transcended individual doubts and echoed elements of resilience. Taking her spot at the front, she scanned the sea of faces, those who had once viewed her with skepticism, but who now listened with genuine intrigue. She began her presentation by weaving in anecdotes, not solely from her perspective, but from the people she had met along the way, demanding they see a full narrative connect human experiences to environmental aspirations. As she spoke, the room gradually shifted. They were no longer questioning her authority. They were captivated by her resolve, resonating with her urgency to evoke change. When the discussion opened up, she saw nods of agreement blossom around the gathering. "The future we envision doesn't exist in solitude," she said passionately, rallying their support not just for her ideas, but for their collective potential to create a ripple effect in the broader community. "Together, we will cultivate spaces where marginalized voices will not only be heard, but cherished." Concrete plans began to form from the groundswell of enthusiasm: community workshops, collaborative initiatives, and partnerships that extended beyond the confines of economic measures. She demonstrated that change wasn't only about ambition, it was about investing in people and shared aspirations. As voices chimed in support, Sarah could feel the weight of her own fears lifting. Her initial confrontation with self-doubt was finally yielding into a celebration of collective courage. The committee had formed within moments. She was no longer a lone wolf, but at the helm of a collaboration, now recognized not merely as a waitress, but as a visionary leader embodying resilience. Sarah left the meeting that day elated, as though she had conquered mountains. Just a short time ago, she had stood at the edge of uncertainty, but now she reveled in a profound sense of belonging. She had forged connections, cemented in the belief that genuine collaboration could disrupt norms that kept voices repressed. In the echo of her heart, she realized her personal growth spanned beyond professional recognition. It was about rekindling a belief in herself, learning to cultivate faith where once only doubt had resided. The shadows of fear and the judgment of others, once perceived as constraints, transformed into an array of insights, illuminating paths of growth. Stepping forward into the future, Sarah felt empowered, possessing both the knowledge and the community to propel her forward. Refracted in each collaboration were the essences of her children's hopes, the legacies of those who dared to dream, and a self once hesitant, now burgeoning into radiant fulfillment. She had found her place within the tapestry of change, firmly rooted in conviction and unwavering resolve. Each step felt bold and purposeful, reinforcing the truth she now understood. She was independent of past judgments, deliberate in her choices, fearless in her commitments, and above all, undeterred in her aspirations. Sarah had painted her own narrative. Her transformation was now complete. The time had come for her to share it with the world. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. It makes a difference. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to subscribe now. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions.